back. All right, take your Bible, if you will. And turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 15. John 15. We're going to talk about God's love today. In a special way, I think. So, we're challenged every day to sort of get back to the basics of what it means to love. And I think we're especially challenged during this very hectic time. It's certainly been a divisive time politically for our nation. It's been a stressful time with COVID-19 and with all kinds of transitions going on in our world. It affects families and individuals and towns and states and countries. I noticed that even some of our friends overseas, France and England and Germany, are reinstituting lockdowns for the next month for their countries. So, there's a lot going on. And I think when there's so much chaos and so much confusion and so much difficulty, that it's always good to sort of get back to the basics of what we're about. To not lose sight of the very basic things that we're about as followers of Jesus. I know that when I played baseball, when our baseball team had a really rough game, the next practice, the coach would sort of start over. There's a funny movie that I won't tell you what it is. No, just kidding. There's a funny movie where the team is really horrible and the coach gets frustrated. The manager's a professional team in the movie. He gets frustrated. He comes back into the thing. All the guys are sitting around there. They've been just beaten very badly, like 16-0, and they're terrible. And so the coach doesn't know what to do. So he comes in and he just picks up a ball and he goes, "This is a baseball." Right? And he picks up a glove. "This is a glove." The baseball goes into the glove, right? Now, I don't know if we have to get that basic all the time, but there are times in Jesus' ministry where he sat his disciples down after a hectic time or chaotic time, or after a time where some difficulty was going on around them, where, as you know, as time went on, more and more people wanted to kill Jesus. And it became more and more difficult to be a disciple of Jesus. They were feeling the pressure. And during those times, I noticed that Jesus sat his disciples down and basically said, "Remember, this is who we are." I love that. And I really believe that that's part of what God is trying to do for us as the church right now. I think he is trying to say to his church all over the world, remember who you are. Remember the basics, right? This is a baseball, right? He's giving us the basic thing. And I think also we are part of that reminder to our world. This is really the way to live. There's a better way to live, a very basic way to live. So I think this is happening here in John chapter 15. We're going to begin at verse 9. But the first 8 verses or so, Jesus has already said that famous passage, "I am the vine, you are the branches," right? You have to be connected to the tree in order to bear fruit. All right, so he's setting the stage for that. He's reminding them, hey, stick with me. You're connected with me. Don't go drifting off into some other way of living, even though it's tempting to do so. And he's saying, don't break away, even though the pressure is on. Don't cut away from me, because without me, you can't bear fruit. You can't do what you're created to do, even in the midst of difficulty, unless you're connected to me. Okay, that's the stage here. And then he goes on to say, beginning at verse 9, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command," okay, so he just said, if you obey my commands, you'll remain in my love. Here's what are the commands. Here they are. Verse 12, "My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because servants do not know their master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. You did not choose me. I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command, that you love one another. That's the word of the Lord today. And there's the big theme there is staying connected, staying in relationship with Jesus, which means staying connected to the ways of Jesus. And I like to use that phrase a lot. That's the first thing I get from this. I like to use that phrase, the ways of Jesus. It's very typical, and it's not a bad way to describe it, to talk about Christianity as asking Jesus into your heart. I think that's a great thing, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, and I've used that a lot, and I've heard that a lot. But I've learned over the last decade or so, I've started using this phrase, come and walk in the ways of Jesus. Because I think that means the same thing. Jesus' invitation is come and join with me, join hands with me, that you may walk in my ways. So what I learned from that is this, and here's the illustration. I believe Christianity is an apprenticeship. You know what an apprenticeship is? Apprentices hang out with people who already know what they're doing, and they sort of shadow them until they learn what they're doing from that person, right? My grandfather was a farmer, and my dad got to do farming a little while, and then, later on he wasn't a farmer, but in his teen years, he did some farming. And his father basically would say, you can know all about farming in your head, but you're not a farmer till you put your hands in the dirt. With me? Some of you know that, you can farm, folks. So you can know, I can describe to you farming all day. That doesn't make me a farmer. Right? I can tell you that if you plant certain crops at a certain time of year, and you water them and plow them and put them a certain feet apart or inches apart, depending on the crop, right? And water it and plow it and work the field and watch it and continue to nurture it, it'll grow. And then once it grows, it bears fruit, maybe it's corn or whatever it is, and then you go and harvest it. I can tell you all that. All that I just said is true, by the way, right? I'm glad you're saying that because you're more connected to farming. I'm a generation removed from farming, so I wasn't a farmer. But all that's true. But all that I just said, none of that makes me a farmer. None of it. Until you get your hands in the dirt. Now I got to my hardest summer probably as a teenager. I was a preteen. My dad and a friend of his who had a bunch of land in East Texas, they decided they would grow some crops, like grow watermelon, which is big in Texas and all. And I say got to with quotes around it. My brother and I. My dad thought it'd be a good idea for us to learn what he knew, and so we spent a summer watching over a little portion of those watermelons and being responsible for them. And, working out in the Texas sun to harvest them when they're done. And, man, when you're 12 and it's July and August and you're out in the Texas sun sort of digging and picking up these things and putting them on the truck. I mean, a little bit challenging. No way did that make me any kind of farmer. But it sure gave me an appreciation for the difference between knowing how to do it and having to actually do it. And it seems to me the way that good farmers or good musicians or good baseball players learn what they do is they get out of the classroom, and there's nothing wrong with the classroom. You've got to have some kind of foundation, basic description of things, and get out there and do it. even my job that I have had for about 13 months, there's a portion of my job that's really kind of technical behind the scenes that most people don't see. And it involves putting shows together and sort of using software to make sure it goes from way out there in the wires or from the reporters and looks like something on the screen. And that, frankly, was the most intimidating part of this job. I knew I could read. You do more than read, you have to edit and all that. But I knew I could read, and I knew I could like sit in front of a camera, which is a lot worse than sitting in front of people for me. I mean, at least in front of people you can see reactions. You just sit in front of a camera hoping someone's reacting in some way. But I knew I could do some of that, but the technical part was hard. And you know how I learned the technical part? I mean, there's little classes they do, but that's not the same. I actually had people who stood with me or who sat with me and said, yeah, don't do that. Or do that, clip there, put that here, make that go this way, otherwise it's never going to show up properly. I was being apprenticed, right? Someone was walking me through it. I think that what Jesus is saying to his disciples is this: I want you to be people of love, who exemplify my love. Great idea, Jesus. Seems to work. It's going to be a tough road. It's not always easy. It's not always quick. But that's a great idea, Jesus. Let's do Love 101. Give me 5 principles of love. Jesus doesn't do that. He doesn't. Give me 27 ways to love, and I'll take those 27 ways with me, and I'll just do those. Jesus says that's not how we're going to do it. How we're going to do it then? Walk with me. Join with me. Connect with me, the vine and the branches, right? Let me walk beside you. Remain in my love. Obey my commands. And I go back to what I was just saying about the ways of Jesus. I really like that description for Christianity, because that's really what Jesus is saying. Christianity is not just between God and me. Christianity is an apprenticeship where I join with God and God's people to walk in the ways of Jesus. And there are times when I need God's Spirit and God's people to go, yeah, not over there. Come back over here. Right? Or, yeah, you can try it this way, but you'll get worn out. Try it that way instead. You with me? That's apprenticeship. There are ways to do it. There's this great novel that I read a few years ago, and it's really influential on me. It's a historical novel. It's called Gutenberg's Apprentice. Remember Gutenberg from the 16th century, the guy who sort of invented and perfected the printing press. And it's the story of this guy, and it's a fictional story, but it tells history of how the printing press came to be. And this guy tells the story of, he's a scribe, right? In the old days, he copies stuff, like lots of stuff, before Xerox. He was pre-Xerox. He was Xerox, And his profession was dying out because this guy came along named Gutenberg, who had this thing that would mass produce, not as quickly as we can do now, but certainly a lot faster than copying by hand. And he was losing his way. He was going to become homeless, so he found a way to get in with Gutenberg so that Gutenberg could teach him from very beginnings how to do this printing press kind of thing. Now, there's more to it, and that sounds boring, I know, but there's more to the novel than that, as you can imagine. But one of the great things he says is, you can't become a master printer by simply knowing how to be a master printer. You must sit down beside the master. I said, wow, that sounds like Christianity. I can't become a Christian and be a consistent Christian by simply knowing about Christianity. I must sit beside the master. I must spend time with this Jesus who's inviting me to walk in this way of love. And I must sit and stand and walk with the people of God whom he puts around me to help keep me in tune. Ever been in a choir? You ever seen choir? Good. Yeah, choirs are fun. Even if you're not a singer, choirs are cool. They're fun to watch. These a cappella groups or whatever. Here, I've been in a bunch of choirs. Here's the thing about a choir. If you're the only one in tune, you're out of tune. That's the thing about a choir. If you're the only one in tune, you're out of tune. You know why? Because you're singing with the choir. And my favorite direction from any choir director I've ever had, the most effective direction I've ever had in years of being in a choir is this. Listen to one another. Right? I love that. And what a good choir director will do is he or she, they'll give you the pitch, or whatever, give you the pitch, and they'll say, okay, and go, and then cut you off and go, listen to each other. Right? It's a lot nicer way than going, Charles, you're singing flat. Which I've had choir directors who will do that. I mean, they'll do that. I had one in Texas, my high school choir director, God rest his soul, he's with the Lord now, but he could be quite cranky. It was funny. I got to sing in two really good choirs, like award-winning choirs, one in high school, one in college. One in high school, the director's approach was more like the cranky director approach, I call it, because he was cranky half the time. He didn't want anybody messing with his music. Know what I mean? Don't mess up my music. He was that way. He was old. He's a Texas guy. God rest him again. I don't mean to mock him. He was a good guy. I liked him, but I feared him. And everybody kind of feared him a little bit because he was so passionate about the music. He would cut up. Now we had all kinds of folks in that choir. It was a good choir. But and I'm making fun of football guys, but the football guys, I wasn't a football guy. The football guys had to have an art class, so a lot of them signed up for choir. And so a couple of guys I stood beside, I sang bass. That's the only thing they could sing was bass. And that's okay. And they were these big old fellas, lineman kind of guys. I mean, much bigger than even I am now. Big guys. And I would sit by them, and they were kind of cut-ups. You know, they could be funny. But I noticed, and Mr. Hart, the choir director, wasn't a very big guy. I mean, he was a middle-sized fellow. But they feared him. I think they were more scared of him than they were their coach. Because Mr. Hart was kind of old school and kind of cranky and loved the music and wanted the music to sound right. Don't mess up his music. And he had this East Texas accent. And if they kind of clowned around or didn't hit their cue, and I had the misfortune of standing right with them because I was in the line of fire half the time. And sometimes, let me admit to you that those guys were funny. And I love a good joke. I'm kind of a laugher anyway. And I was in the line of fire often, but Mr. Hart would stop and just stand there and look. And one of my favorite choir member was Curtis, and Curtis was a lineman. He was about 6'4", 255 pounds. Big fella. But Curtis had a little too much humor for Mr. Hart. Mr. Hart wasn't digging his humor. And so every once in a while, Curtis would sing something funny to make the girls laugh. He would sing the words wrong right behind them to make them laugh. Or he would sing the note wrong to make them laugh. And every once in a while, Mr. Hart would miss it because he was getting older. But not always. Mr. Hart would cut the choir off. And his approach was not, listen to one another. That wasn't his approach. His approach was, Curtis, I'll jerk you off those risers in about 2 seconds. That was his approach. And I thought, you ain't jerking that 255-pound guy off. I didn't say this out loud. I just thought it. You ain't jerking that 255-pound guy off those risers. But Curtis believed it. And Curtis sang better by the end of the term. And we won top in our division. Because Mr. Hart's approach to discipleship was more direct. But then, I got to college, and my college director at Southern Methodist University, one of the great Methodist composers and singers, big bass voice, Dr. Lloyd Fausch. And if you ever get to read about or hear, he just passed away not too long ago. He was director of choirs, a wonderful Methodist man, loved the Lord, and just was the jolliest man I've ever been around. And I would say this guy can't run a choir because he's not, he doesn't jerk people down off the risers. And you know what? That was an amazing experience because he would just start us and he would just stop us and he would smile and he would say, listen to one another. And he would say, he would call us Mustangs, S-M-U Mustang. Mustangs, listen to one another. Let's try it again. And we would just sing the thing again and it would be better. And I was like, how does this guy do that? And we had an award-winning choir with him, just with a different approach. Jesus is saying, if you can try my loving approach and connect with me and watch me and listen to me and listen to one another, then you will be my disciples. You won't just be servants who are distant and don't know their master's business. You will be my friends. You'll be my ambassadors. You'll be my people. You'll walk in my ways. And from my ways, this Christian life will become attractive, even to the world. Isn't that something? That's our calling, folks. It really is. It's hard. It's not human nature. Human nature is to beat you down until you lose. The nature of Jesus is to woo you. Can I say woo? You know what woo is? Is to woo you. Is to shine his light of love and grace in such a way that it just becomes almost impossible to resist. He loves us into the kingdom, and then he allows us to be part of his choir. And when we get out of tune, which we all do, he says to us, listen to me and listen to one another. How about that? Listen to me. Stay with me. Walk in my ways with one another. And if you need some guidance, my Spirit is here with you. And if you're not quite sure where to step, I'll put people around you who are mine, who are also walking in my ways, that you might see that you are mine. And that the world will see. In that very next verse, by the way, he says, hey, don't be surprised if the world hates you, because they hated me. Don't be surprised if they don't get it. They're not accustomed to this way. But be apprenticed by me. Let me show you a new way so that you can show them a new way. Isn't that great? That makes us all a part of the mission. Whether you're influencing one person or 1,000, you get to be a part of that mission. I like that. And what comes from that, then, finally, that love produces joy. It spreads. It becomes contagious. Love, here's my command, Jesus said. And I bet they were taking notes. I bet they were waiting for a list of 27 commands to do all this right. 21 irrefutable ways to, be a great bestseller, wouldn't it? There's a, I gotta be careful. Okay, I'm recording, but that's okay. I won't name the person. But there's a book called 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. I don't like those kind of titles. Because my nature is, I'm a questioner. You know that by now. I've always been. It kind of helped me survive probably doctoral work because my personality is not geared toward doctoral work. I'd rather be out talking to people than sitting in a library. My wife will tell you that. She I struggled. I mean, she was a very big help. I mean, she has a graduate degree too, but there were times where I would throw a book across. I mean, I'd be frustrated. Do you want to graduate or not? Well, okay, I'll pick the book back up. It's not my nature. But one of the things I learned is this kind of focus comes from being committed to the bigger picture of things. Being committed to the bigger picture of what it's about. And so In this relationship with Jesus, Jesus says, don't worry if they hate you. Don't worry if they abandon you. Go ahead and let me walk you through it. The result of that is this. We become people who live and give up our lives even the way Jesus did. Right? That's the result. We become people who live and give up their lives the way Jesus did. I could never come up with that on my own. I would never normally, naturally do that. Right? Human nature doesn't say give up your life for someone else. It says protect your life and good luck to them. I hope they make it. Jesus says, let me introduce you to a new way of living that is really the only way to live. But there's only one way to get there. You've got to get your hands in the dirt, right? You've got to let me walk with you. You've got to listen to me and listen to one another. You've got to let me walk you through it, to lead you through it. I have friends in AA, and one of the AA story, Alcoholics Anonymous stories that they tell is a famous old AA story where a guy falls into a ditch, a deep hole, and a doctor comes by and writes a prescription and throws the prescription in the hole and walks away. And then a minister comes by and writes a prayer and throws the prayer into the hole and walks away. But then a third guy, a friend, comes along and jumps into the hole with you. And the man in the hole says, what are you doing? Now we're both in the hole. And the friend says, don't worry, I've been in the hole before. I know how to get out. That's the difference, isn't it? That's what Jesus is telling his disciples to do. Walk with me, remain in my love, obey my commands, and you will love as I love. Watch me. Walk with me. Certainly know about me. There's nothing wrong. Learn the verses, learn theology, but walk with me so that you may become an example of what I'm about. Well, what's the deal about that? That will draw all people. That will draw people to my Father and give them the life that they long for, that they can never have without me. The end of his life, John Newton, we're going to close with Amazing Grace here in a minute, but John Newton, the writer of Amazing Grace, I told you this story before, but I like this story. In his old age, he pastored actually a very long time. He was not only a hymn writer, but a pastor. And he had a rough life early on. You probably know that story. He was like a slave trader, and he was a rotten guy, almost died, and then surrendered his life to Christ, and things changed, right? And he actually trained for the ministry, became a pastor in England, and he pastored the church a long time that he was a part of. But by the end, his mind, from some of the abuses of his early days, his mind began to wear on him. This was the 18th century. He often forgot the names of parishioners. He often, even the people that he'd known for 25 years, he'd forget their names. He would forget words even to hymns that he wrote. He would sometimes struggle even in his sermons because he would lose his train of thought, which I do even now. But he did it more often. And a group of his parishioners came to him and said, Reverend Newton, we love you. We certainly are not asking you to leave or anything. You're part of our family. But if you would like to simply retire, we can make sure you're cared for and bring someone else in. We want you to stay, but we don't want this to tax you, to be a struggle for you. And he smiled, and according to the story, and said, in my line of work, I only need to remember two things. I am a great sinner, and I serve a great Savior. These are the things that I'll continue to remember. I think when we remember those things, it gets us back to the basics of who we are, doesn't it? It reminds us that in the midst of all this chaos and trying to come up with creative ways to kind of figure out politics and figure out health and figure out economics, these are important things. But I think the most important thing is what Jesus sat down with his disciples and said. Walk in my ways. Follow my commands so that you can love as I love. This command I give you, love one another. Greater love has no one than this, that he give up his life on behalf of another. I no longer call you servants. He's giving them a little hint about what's to come. I call you friends. What is he saying? He's saying, I'm the kind of friend who's about to give my very life for you. You'll not only know it, you'll see it. And once you see it, he says to them, go and do likewise. Not a bad way to live, folks, right? It's really not. It's a tough way to live. But it's a lot tougher to live without hope, to live without a Savior. And so Jesus is saying to them, I think what he's saying to us, it's the only way to live. Let's stand together.